The design and strategies of your distribution channels will have a significant impact on your marketing, on your operations, and on your business as a whole. There are countless businesses that have focused so much on their product and promotion that they neglected their distribution channel strategy, and some of them even went out of business as a result. In this video, we'll discuss some channel strategy and design processes so that you can apply these directly to your current business or to a business that you want to create. Let's get started. I'll start with an overview of what will be covered in this presentation. So we'll start by understanding that we have to understand the multitude of channel functions that exist in the marketplace. Then we'll talk about channel members and where you'll need to identify potential channel members and their capabilities. Then we'll talk about channel design, where you'll have to learn how to evaluate the market environment and design the distribution channel. And then the channel strategy, where we explore various channel strategies, and then you'll try to select the best one considering both short-term and long-term perspectives. And finally, you'll need to learn about channel tactics and why you'll need to implement channel tactics that are agile and responsive to market fluctuations. So we start with an attempt to gain a relatively strong understanding of the many channel functions that exist in the marketplace. And as we do this, keep in mind the maxim that you can eliminate the intermediary, but you can't eliminate its cost. In a previous video, I discussed the classic 5 functions of physical distribution channels, those being product acquisition, transportation or shipping, storage or warehousing, and then display or retailing, and finally product delivery. Let's talk now about a number of other channel functions that'll be pertinent to your channel design and strategy decisions. I'll go through these channel functions fairly rapidly, but you're welcome, of course, to explore each of them individually to learn more about them and how they might impact your particular distribution channel decisions. So let's start with negotiations. Obviously, in channels, there are people involved, and you have to be able to negotiate back and forth with the different people that are involved in all of these different entities, these different companies. And learning how to negotiate and what to negotiate is critical to your channel success. The next is information flow. Obviously, there's no communication without information flow, and there can be no business conducted without communication. So learning how to get that information to flow both efficiently and effectively is another critical aspect. The next is risk-taking. When we own goods, when we ship goods, when we store goods, all of these involve a certain amount of risk, and this is one of the functions that different channel members might take on to a different degree. We typically want to get rid of the risk by giving that to someone else, but when we do give that to someone else, then they're going to charge us a premium because they're taking on the risk. The next is research. When we're in a channel, we want to learn as much as we can, not only about our end users or the customers that we might have, but we also want to learn about all of the other groups that are in that channel. The more we know about those groups, the more likely we'll be able to influence them, and the more likely we can get the type of channel that will be beneficial to us. Another distribution channel function is that of bulk breaking or sorting. So a lot of times when maybe a wholesaler or a retailer will get something where it comes in massive amounts, massive big bulks, like a big giant pallet of something, but they don't need all that's on that pallet for one particular store, so they break that bulk and then they sort it out and then divvy it up to the different retailers or other groups that might be able to get that. Price stability. One of the channel functions that's very important, especially for retailers, is the price stability that a wholesaler might give them. When manufacturers change their prices, oftentimes wholesalers can absorb a little bit of that price fluctuation and not necessarily have to pass it on to the retailer, or the retailer will absorb that price fluctuation so that the items in the grocery store aren't changing on a regular basis. I mean, they do change, but there is some degree of price stability by having the different players in that distribution channel. Promotions. Promotions aren't just given to the end user, the consumer. Promotions oftentimes are actually provided from the manufacturer that might be to the wholesaler and to the retailer as well. And these types of promotions come down as a push promotion to be able to try to push a particular product toward the consumer. We'll talk a little bit more about push strategies later on. Brand awareness and image. Throughout the channel, we have to be concerned about our brand awareness and our brand image. If we're the manufacturer or we're the retailer, whoever we are, we have to be concerned about our image as well as the image and awareness of the products that we're trying to sell. Import-export management. Nowadays, everyone out there, it seems, is affected to some degree by international trade. And so whether we're actually trading our product in an international arena or we're sourcing our product from an international source, at some point we're probably going to have to deal with import and export, or we're going to have someone else in our channel deal with that for us. Next is sales. Now, in every part of the distribution channel, there's some degree of sales happening because somebody somewhere needs to buy something from someone else. But we also know that the sales is a function that may occur even to the end user, sometimes done by a retailer, sometimes by a distributor, and even sometimes by a manufacturer that makes the sale even though it's purchased at the retail location. Financing is critical. When there's a flow of compensation, the flow of money, then we have to make sure that there's some type of financing involved. You may have heard of terms like 210 net 30. And 210 net 30 means that 2%, that if you get the payment, if you make the payment within 10 days, you'll save 2% on that money, which is a really good deal. But the balance is due within 30 days. But other types of financing exist, and financing is critical because not everyone in the channel has the cash liquidity to be able to pay cash for every transaction that occurs. So sometimes there has to be a little bit of financing where things are held on credit and then paid later on. Payment processing. When we're talking about that flow of compensation, then somebody somewhere has to process those payments. Whether it's done through a credit card or it's done in-house, someone has to take care of that particular channel function. Standardizing transactions means that at some point we want to try to make sure that the transactions that the end user in particular deals with are standardized, and so they don't change from one person to another. Now, this may occur in the retail location, it may occur somewhere else, but the idea is that we want to make sure that what people have an expectation that when they walk in the door, there's going to be a certain standard that it applies to those particular transactions that they make. Customer service pre-sale. This means all of the work that's done prior to you actually purchasing something. So if you walked into Home Depot, then you have people there that are going to help you. But sometimes you'll actually have a manufacturer's representative there who may be there with a special display or a special presentation, and then they can answer the questions for you. So again, sometimes at the retail level, sometimes maybe a distributor, sometimes the manufacturer. Customer support post-sale. Let's say that you buy something at IKEA, and then you're trying to put together this shelf at home and you have a problem. Then someone is going to be able to be at the other end of a 1-800 number, and you're going to call that toll-free number and you're going to talk to them, and they're going to help you with the customer support. And so whether you buy an item through a channel that's direct from the manufacturer, or it goes manufacturer to wholesaler to retailer to you, either way, at some point you're going to have some type of post-sale support, most likely back toward the manufacturer. Returns are another channel function that's critical. Sometimes you may be able to make a return directly to the retailer, but there are other times when they want you to make the return directly to the manufacturer. And it all depends on how they want to manage that particular function within that particular channel. Disposal and recycling. Now, you might think that, well, this doesn't really have to do with anything that's up channel, but the truth is sometimes it does. You know that when you buy tires, that oftentimes they'll charge you a disposal fee. And that just means that somehow that money is going to go either to the government or to some other entity to help take care of all of the disposal of all those tires, so they don't just end up in the ocean or somewhere else. And then the final function is actually a set of interrelated functions consisting of possession, ownership, and liability. Now, in a normal world, if we own something, we possess it physically, and because we own and possess it, we hold the risk of liability if something breaks or it's stolen or it becomes spoiled or obsolete. But in distribution channels, there are times when one entity may own a product while another entity has physical possession and a third is liable for the damage. Take the case of a furniture retailer where some customers come into the store and buy a table. The customers pay for the product, and because of that, they now have ownership of the table. But if the customers are unable to move the product to their residence because they don't have a car or truck big enough, the furniture retailer might say, well, we'll take care of that for you, and then they hire a third-party delivery company to deliver the table. So while the table is on the truck, the customers own it, the third-party delivery company has possession, but the furniture company ultimately is liable to the customer for any damage that occurs en route. Now, maybe the third party is liable to the retail store, but the retail store is the one who is liable to the customer. Now, the goal of most entities in the distribution channel is to limit the time that they have all three of possession, ownership, and liability. You want less time in possession because possession incurs inventory costs. You have to store it somewhere. You want less ownership, typically, because that means that your money is tied up in the product rather than being invested. And of course, you want less liability because that poses a risk in the case of the product being lost or damaged or stolen. So when you consider all of these distribution channel functions, along with the classic 5 on the previous slide, you can see that distribution covers pretty much all of marketing with the flow of information, product innovation, and compensation, as well as numerous transaction costs. Now let's take a look at various channel members. When considering channel members, we need to identify potential channel members who can participate in our distribution channel and assess their capabilities. Now, channel members can be for-profit and nonprofit organizations. They can be people, they can be governments. The channel members that are typically discussed are the manufacturers, distributors, wholesalers, retailers, agents, brokers, and end users, which can be business users or consumers. But there are other channel members as well. For example, pre-manufacturer channel members might be raw materials acquirers, such as mining or logging companies, parts manufacturers, component manufacturers, and assemblers. And then some examples of post-usage channel members could be refurbishing or recycling centers to recycle products such as smartphones or ink cartridges or appliances or computers or home goods and food packaging. They could also be related to the disposal function, such as local trash collection services and trash collection centers. Finally, there might be channel members who offer services to help in self-disposal or reuse, such as composting services or furniture refinishers. As we identify various channel members who have an association or potential association with our product offerings and or our target audiences, we need to assess them with respect to their respective strengths, capabilities, and weaknesses. We want to know that if we choose them to participate in our channel to the end user, that they'll be able to deliver the appropriate levels of quality, service, speed, etc. for our industry and our audiences. Now, depending on our knowledge of supply and distribution channels, we may feel a need to use third-party companies whose job is to be matchmakers of sorts. They can uncover key players that could participate in our channels and help us to understand their capabilities. Now, in the next few slides, we'll go back to the typically discussed channel members and briefly cover some of their many typical functions. So here's a huge list of functions that may be performed by a manufacturer or producer. The performance of some of these functions would depend on the nature of the distribution channel. For example, some of the functions performed in a direct-to-end user channel would be likely different than those performed in a channel that has a wholesaler and a retailer. Now, I won't read through each of these, but I'll touch on a few of them. So let's look at quality control and testing. So a manufacturer wants to make sure they have solid quality, so oftentimes they may have some type of quality control or testing. Now that same quality control could be done by an outside party, or the manufacturer could do it themselves. There's also quality control that happens in retail stores, and also in wholesalers, but to a lesser degree. So the idea here is that this is another function that a manufacturer has to take on or has to outsource to somewhere else. The same with inspection. Packaging, the manufacturer has to take care of the packaging. They may not produce the packaging, they may outsource the production of the packaging, but at some point they have to package the goods. Customer support, I mentioned previously that you might buy something at a retail store, but when you call that 1-800 number, you're calling probably back to the manufacturer or to some group that they have outsourced to take care of that customer support. Let's skip over a few of these then. Sub-assembly and final assembly. Depending on what the manufacturer does and how they do this and what the regulations are, sometimes what will happen is manufacturers will take sub-assemblies and then they'll bring them together so they can say that it was manufactured in the United States and get certain benefits for that. So receiving, shipping, scrap and waste processing. Sometimes when you have extra excess, then you have to make sure that you can take care of that scrap material or waste material. Need or desire identification. This goes back to the buying decision process that you learned very early in the program. The idea here is that the manufacturer, because they're manufacturing products, needs to understand what are the needs and desires of those end users so that they can create products that they feel will be the best product for that end user to purchase. Monitoring trends, evaluating suppliers. Let's move on to labor management. So the manufacturer has to take care of all of that labor that's there, or again, they may outsource that to someone else to take care of that for them. And then let's even go down to the very last one, specification of dimensions and tolerances. This may be done by an external party, perhaps a government entity that says that certain dimensions and tolerances have to be to a certain specification, or it may be something that the manufacturer does on their own, or it may be something that's done at an industry level. So again, these are a nice set, not all the functions of a manufacturer, but definitely a lot of them. For the distributor, the tasks are less about production and more about being the true intermediary that a distributor is. Again, I'll only mention a few of these. So one of these is risk management. So you're getting product, you're trying to develop markets, you're trying to develop the retailer, you're trying to get those products to the end user, and at the same time, you've invested your time and effort into this, and you may actually hold on to product. So when you're holding on to product, when you're storing it, when you're transporting it, you've got to manage that risk. Also, licenses and permits. If you're a distributor that moves product across states or across countries, then you have to deal with the right licenses and permits so that you can adhere to whatever regulations and laws are in those local areas. Rack jobbing. Rack jobbing, we discussed that in the previous video. Rack jobbing is when you may come in as a distributor and actually shelve the items. You might come in and put all the items on the shelf, take away the old items that are expired. For example, you might see this when you're buying bread and you see somebody in there who's got a big cart and they're putting in new bread and they're taking out the old bread because the old bread is getting a little bit old. So they want to make sure that they do this the right way so that you get fresh bread, and sometimes they do this and get paid directly. Sometimes they even get a percentage of those revenues or those profits. So let's go ahead and move on to the wholesaler. The wholesaler functions are quite similar to the distributor, but with a little less interaction with the end users. So again, maybe this might be a matter of bulk goods packaging, where the wholesaler brings in something with bulk goods and breaks it down, warehousing, transportation, grading, the quality or size, etc. So maybe someone brings in eggs and then they grade the eggs and make sure that the eggs are inspected the right way or graded the right way. Bearing risk again, negotiating, packing. Sometimes if a wholesaler brings in something that is in bulk, they may have to actually repack, not necessarily packaging, but repack so that they can then ship it to the retailers. And then finally, drop shipping. A lot of times wholesalers, because they have the warehouse and they have the ability and they have the electronics and the technology, they're able to drop ship products so that if something is ordered online, it may go directly to a wholesaler who then packages it all up and then mails it to wherever it's supposed to be. So the retailers have a lot to do, but their focus is on the end user or consumer. So obviously display of goods, managing stock, avoiding stockouts, making sure that you don't have empty shelves, because if there's nothing on the shelf, then you can't sell it. If the product's not on the shelf, and providing information to the customers and backwards to the wholesalers or to the manufacturers. Let's go through here. Loss reduction and prevention. So as opposed to the manufacturer who only deals with employees and opposed to the wholesaler and the distributor who only deal with employees most of the time, the retailer has a lot of people in those retail stores. And one of the things that they have to do is make sure that they prevent the what's called loss reduction or loss prevention. And so we want to prevent loss. And that means is you want to prevent things from being stolen, things from being destroyed, things from being damaged, so that you don't end up losing out on that money. Retailers also have to create demand. They have other marketing functions as well, advertising, promoting, and of course they want to host a variety of products. Agents or brokers, they are the matchmakers, bringing together buyers and sellers. But agents and brokers sometimes also do advertising. They do selling. They may do some purchasing if they're going to own something, and negotiating, and of course back to risk-taking. And then also one of the key elements here is contract completion. And finally, the end user. The end user, whether a consumer or a business user, also has a number of functions that they have to take care of. So first of all, they have to identify what product will fill their needs or desires. It takes work to do that, right, through the buying decision process. They have the function of usage or consumption. They negotiate. There's some transportation and storage. You transport your food from the grocery store to your house and you store it in your house for a certain period of time. There's an assessment of the competition. There is risk taking. So caveat emptor, right? Let the buyer beware. And so that risk taking of making sure that you go to the right retailer and that you buy the right product. Otherwise, then it's on you because you're the one who is supposed to check out that competition and make the right choice. Timely returns, making sure if you're returning something, you return it within the window that's provided by the manufacturer or by the retailer. Feedback and reviews, warranty redemption, and even word of mouth promotion, even though you may not feel compelled to do it, it is a function that belongs to the end user. So now we've considered channel functions and channel members, at least the basic ones. Let's look at channel design. Channel design is focused on evaluating the market environment and designing the distribution channel to fit that environment. The channel design process consists of 6 steps that start with researching the target customer's needs and desires, then analyzing those needs and desires, then follows with an assessment of the product offering, the marketplace, and the interactions between the two. It then moves to the company side with a determination of the organizational capabilities and the cost to deliver what the target audience wants. Finally, with all this, the company sets the organizational goals and then identifies, evaluates, and selects the channel alternatives. So I'll now explain each of these steps. When researching your customer needs and desires with respect to distribution channels, it's critical to conduct formal research. This can be in the form of in-depth interviews, focus groups, surveys, or even observations where you can observe how your customers buy within that particular product category. Mapping the buying decision process is a great way to start, and it'll help you to build a digital and a non-digital ecosystem, as well as detailed customer journey maps. The key here is to not rely only on your instincts, but to use sound marketing research practices to collect your data. As you're researching your potential customers, find out what they want. Do they want to take immediate possession, or are they okay with receiving the product a few days or weeks later? Do they feel that having a variety of types or flavors is important to them? For example, the typical large grocery store might have a few versions of peanut butter, creamy, crunchy, natural, but their selection of yogurts is probably much more extensive, with some brands having between 15 and 20 flavors. Also, another question, do your customers want customized service? Are they focused on trust or comfort or reducing anxiety? These needs and desires will be important both in selecting trading partners as well as in building the type of distribution channels that facilitate the filling of those needs. The next step is to analyze all the data that you've collected from your customers. Determine which of the various preferences are the strongest and most important to your target audience. And also, now's the time to segment the market based on those preferences if you feel that each of those segments might use a different type of distribution channel. Now, with each analysis, always consider how the distribution channel may play a role in satisfying each of these desires or needs of the customers, of the end users. In fact, the discussion discussed the satisfaction of each need or desire in terms of distribution and channel management. The same goes for the target segments. How can each person or each customer persona or customer profile be described in terms of the flows of information, product innovation, and compensation, or in terms of the reduction of transaction costs? The next step in channel design is to assess the product offering, the marketplace environment, and how these two, the product offering and the marketplace, interact. To assess the product, consider the type or nature of the product, such as is it perishable or seasonal or trendy or subject to obsolescence? Is it sturdy or is it fragile? Is it highly regulated? The nature of the product can be a key determinant factor in the design of your distribution channel. For example, for perishable goods such as fresh vegetables, having a long channel with multiple intermediaries could potentially contribute to spoilage. If the product's seasonal and must be produced in bulk out of season, such as toys for the December holiday season, then selecting an intermediary with large and inexpensive storage capacity is critical. Another key factor to consider regarding the product is the level of sales effort required to sell the product. If the product requires intense sales efforts, then a more direct approach might be the best in order to ensure that the product is sold as the producer desires. Other product factors to consider could be customer service requirements of the product offering or even the size of the order. For example, did people buy this one at a time or are they buying it in bulk purchases? The marketplace also needs to be studied. Is the market relatively large or small? How's the geographic dispersion of your target customers? If it's relatively spread out, perhaps a wholesaler could help. If it's extremely dispersed, it might be best to consider online sales. And then other marketplace factors are the level of competition, the density of intermediaries, how many retailers are there that you're going to be selling to, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Trade margins, what are the trade margins in the marketplace that are out there? That's going to make a difference for me when I try to decide which channel I'm going to have. And then timing. Maybe are we looking at something where the norm is just-in-time shipping? We have to look at labor and production scheduling. We have to look at inventory management. Now, and by the way, I'm going to go back here. In the case of intermediary density, consider that with the retailers, the more retailers selling your product near each other, the less each will earn due to the high availability. And then the more likely price promotions will drive down the final price, which also may affect your margins. And then finally, you need to consider the interactions between the product offering and the marketplace. For example, a geographically dispersed audience might call for online shopping or a widespread intermediary such as a wholesaler, yet if the product requires intense sales efforts, it might not be fit for a wholesaler to retailer type of a channel. So this conflict due to the interaction of these marketplace and product offering attributes would need to be resolved prior to moving forward with the channel design. The fourth step in channel design is to determine the organizational capabilities of your firm and other firms with respect to channel functions, as well as the costs of performing those functions. What are you good at with respect to channel functions? What could you become better at? Remember that when assessing capabilities, it's not just a matter of whether your organization can do the job, but one of which potential channel member could do it better. Also, you need to determine which firms are able to perform the functions in a cost-effective manner. In other words, we seek performance effectiveness and performance efficiency. Step 5 in the channel decision or the channel design process is to set organizational objectives. These pertain to your organization and should be focused on the marketing objectives that you have for your brand and or your product offering, which you'll achieve with the help of your distribution strategy. You can consider setting objectives for sales, branding, customer audience building, profit, market expansion, when you want to move into other typically geographic marketplaces, and product offering expansion. In other words, adding new products to your product line. So as you set these objectives, remember to make them SMART objectives and to consider them with respect, again, to your distribution channel. The final step in the channel design is to identify, evaluate, and select channel alternatives. So to do this, consider the following steps. First, rank prospective channel members by their fitness to participate. So how good are they? And how appropriate are they? There might be some prospective channel members who rank so low that you just won't even want to work with them, even if this means moving away from a preferred channel design that might have seemed ideal. Remember that the channel is made up of its organizations and people. And the weakest link may mean low effectiveness and or low efficiency. Next, determine which combinations of channel entities will provide both efficiency and effectiveness. Here's where you design your channel and start negotiating with your prospective members to try to reach your series of mutually beneficial exchange relationships with each of them. So while doing all this, consider both channel opportunities and channel constraints. You don't want to get stuck in a channel that can't grow if growth is one of your primary objectives. Also, remember that channel decisions often are not either-or decisions. Sometimes it's perfectly fine to have multiple channels and multiple players playing a particular role. Just be careful to avoid channel conflict that may occur between your members. That conflict could result in lower margins, negative brand equity, and even distribution shutdowns. And finally, consider the adaptability of your various channel members and your channel systems. Maybe you want to start with a distributor so that you can quickly get into a new market, but you have the idea of going direct to the retailers within a few years. Or maybe you want to expand to other channel models later, or perhaps service new geographical regions, including international. But if your channel members and or your channel systems are not flexible and adaptable, you're going to have a difficult time fulfilling your goals and objectives. So as we're developing our channel design, we need to simultaneously consider our channel strategy by exploring various channel strategies and selecting the best one that considers both short-term and long-term perspectives. Now, there are a number of channel strategy issues you can consider, but I'll talk about 5 of them here. Retail distribution intensity, push and pull strategies, the benefits of having a wholesaler or distributor, direct versus indirect distribution, and strategic fit. So retail distribution intensity. Let's talk first about this. If you're a manufacturer, you have several options when it comes to retail distribution intensity. You could start with intensive distribution, which means that you'll attempt to put your product in as many retail outlets as possible. So examples of companies or brands that do this are Hershey's and Coca-Cola or Doritos. It seems that you can walk into almost any store and you can find a Hershey's bar. I can go into Home Depot and there's Hershey's right there for me to buy. So you have to think of what the benefits are of this type of distribution strategy. So if you think about this, you get a lot of product on a lot of shelves, which means you're probably going to have higher brand awareness. You have higher availability. In other words, a person can buy it wherever they go, and you're most likely going to have higher sales volume. Now, there may be some cons to this as well. We'll talk about those in a minute. But first, let's talk about the opposite end of the continuum, and that's exclusive distribution. So with exclusive distribution, you limit your distribution to only one outlet or chain of outlets per geographic region. Now, that usually the reason why we do this is because we want the exclusive rights to do this, and by having this exclusivity, a lot of times we get a certain amount of prestige that goes along with that. So for example, if I say that my clothing line is only going to be sold at Saks Fifth Avenue, well, now it sounds like because it's this exclusive deal with Saks, that it must be a really, really good clothing line. Now remember, the exclusive can work both directions. I can be selling exclusively to you, but then also you might make a deal that says that you tell me you will only buy from me for that particular product category. So that exclusive works in both directions. In the middle then is selective distribution. So selective distribution is where we don't necessarily exclude everyone else and only sell to one outlet or one chain per geographic region, but at the same time, we're not trying to get it into every single outlet. Now, the selective is chosen a lot of times because there is a particular problem with intensive distribution. And there's two big problems. Number one problem is that the more retailers or the more entities I have to deal with, then the more money I have to spend to deal with them. And it may not really be worth it for me to do that. The other issue is the more that I get my product out there, that means that more and more of those end retailers, those retailers are going to be competing now against each other with my product. And that competition typically means that they're going to have that conflict there means that they're going to end up dropping their prices, dropping their margins, and they're going to come back and put pressure on me. Even if I'm using a wholesaler, they're going to put pressure on me to lower my margins as well. So sometimes it's not good for us to get that intensive distribution. Another problem that happens, a related problem with that, is that as I put my product in more and more retail establishments, the percentage of sales for that retailer that are mine, that come from my products, goes down because a lot of other people are selling it. So while my overall volume might go up, the volume of my products being sold at any particular retailer might go down. And let's say I'm selling electronics, and it used to be that I was 20% of their revenues or 20% of their profits, then they're going to give me a lot of attention. They're going to push my product a lot for me because they're making money from it. But as I start to intensify my distribution and start to sell at other electronic stores, then because the consumer now doesn't have to go to that one electronic store for it, they can go somewhere else, then their volume goes down. So even though my volume goes up, the individual retailer's volume goes down. And if it drops from 20% down to, let's say, 3% or 2% or 1%, now they're not going to give my brand as much love as they would have given had I still kept that 20%. So I really have to think through these types of decisions. Now, multiple distribution or multi-channel distribution just really means that I might be going through different types of channels, but also I might do different ways to do this. I might be intensive in one area, might be selective or exclusive in another area. It may be that I start to use different types of channels or different channel members to move my product. And then the last thing I want to mention is effective distribution. Now, it's called effective when the idea is that a high percentage of sales comes from a low percentage of outlets. So say 70% of the sales comes from 15% or 20% of the outlets. And why is this effective? It's effective because it helps us to focus our efforts on those few retailers that are really selling our product. Now, could there be an issue with this? Sometimes, in fact, the first time I ever taught an MBA program or MBA course at University of Miami, I had a student who worked for Revlon, and he was telling me that 50% of Revlon's sales came from Walmart. So that's good. So now they had a whole team of people that help with Walmart, but it also means that Walmart is highly invested as well. And so what would happen, though, is that Walmart had a lot of control in that channel, because Walmart would say, well, we're 50% of your sales, you better listen to what we say. In fact, he even mentioned once that Walmart had come up with a shade of lipstick or something that or eyeshadow that was in between two other shades that it felt would sell, and they basically said to Revlon, hey, you got to do this. And Revlon just said, absolutely, Walmart, whatever you want, because you're 50% of our sales. Now, I had another student whose father owned a broom factory in Mexico, and he actually had 90% of his sales going to Walmart here in the States. And the only reason he didn't have a full 100% was because he secretly held back 10% because he didn't want them to have all of his sales. And you think about this, he's in a very vulnerable spot. In fact, one time, my student told me that her father was contacted by Walmart and told, we want you to change the design of your broom. And it wasn't really a choice. You had to change it or we're not going to buy it from you anymore. So he changed the design at his cost, and then sold this again to Walmart. But imagine the concerns, because if Walmart's 90% of your business, if for some reason they decide not to renew that contract in the future, you've got to go out and find new business that you have not been developing. And he was producing at capacity, so he really was in a tight spot. And Walmart also gave him pretty low margins, but lots and lots of volume. So push and pull strategies. For a push strategy, well, first of all, this idea of a push and pull strategy it's a combination of integrated communications and also channel partner participation, typically. So if you're a manufacturer, you want to motivate your wholesalers and retailers to push your product toward the end user. And this can be done by convincing the channel partners that pushing the product will, for example, bring in new customers or build the retailer's brand, or just that it will generate significant volume, which will translate into higher revenues and profits. Many times the push strategy involves some type of a bonus or incentive to the wholesalers and retailers. It might be a per unit discount, but more likely it'll be a step level discount that's connected to a particular volume threshold. For example, any units sold past a particular quantity will receive an additional 20% discount to the channel partner, which translates directly into margin. So consumers might wonder if this is happening if they go to the car dealership, and it seems that regardless of what they're looking for in a car, the salesperson keeps redirecting them back to a particular model. It might be that a manufacturer's incentive to the dealer is motivating the dealer and the salesperson and motivating their actions. Pull strategies are focused on the end user with an attempt to pull them into the marketplace by using advertisements or direct marketing or events or any other method of communicating the value of the product directly from the manufacturer. Consumers might even pull the product through the distribution channels by requesting the product, enough that retailers then request it from the manufacturers or wholesalers. You may even have heard an ad before that might end with a plea for you to ask your local supermarket or ask your local, supermarket manager for a particular product. And that's kind of an example of an old school pull approach. So the benefits of involving a wholesaler or distributor. And there are a number of benefits. But a lot of times people want to go direct. They just want to keep going direct. But wholesalers or distributors really are helpful for a number of things. First of all, if you want rapid expansion with little or no investment into a market, the wholesaler or distributor is already there. You just get to kind of get into their catalog, and now all of a sudden you've got this market covered. Locking out competitors. If you can get an exclusive deal for a particular type of product with a wholesaler or distributor, and they're the ones who have all the connections with the retailers, you might be able to lock out, at least temporarily, some of your competitors so that you can get your brand known in that area. Also, working with the wholesaler or distributor does open doors to retailers. There are some retailers who just don't want to deal with the manufacturers, especially small ones, Publix, for example. So what's going to happen is you're going to have to find a wholesaler who will then get you into Publix. I mentioned this before, that wholesalers and distributors might be able to temper the fluctuations of manufacturer production and pricing. So the pricing, if the pricing starts to go up or down, then the wholesaler can try to keep it a little bit steady. But they also can temper fluctuations of manufacturer production. So if something happens with the production line, hopefully there's enough of a stock with the wholesaler that they can then make sure that those changes in production don't go all the way to the retailer and affect the end user. The other thing about having a wholesaler or distributor on board is now you have someone else who has a vested interest in your success. So they're going to work hard, especially a distributor, to make sure that you're successful, because your success means you're going to order more. And when you order more, then they're going to get a bigger cut of the action. So they really will help you to do things right. And then also sharing channels, you can share channel functions with these hopefully efficient entities. And so wholesalers and distributors that have been around for a while, they've learned the way to do things really well. They can now take care of some of those channel functions most likely more efficiently than you could as a manufacturer, as a retailer. And by doing that, they add value to the entire supply chain, value to the distribution channel, and that value comes back in more profits for them, more profits for the manufacturer, and more profits for the retailer. So direct versus indirect distribution, as mentioned in a previous video, there are many people that claim that direct distribution is either less costly or because the two parties can avoid paying the profits for the intermediary, or more costly because the costs have to be absorbed by one or both of the two parties. The truth is that when it comes to monetary efficiencies, it depends. And it depends on whether the intermediary can perform some of the necessary distribution functions more efficiently than the other two channel members. If they can, the channel becomes more efficient, and there's more profit to be made by some or all. But there is one certainty. So maybe I'm not certain about the cost, but the one certainty with respect to direct versus indirect is with direct distribution, the parties have more control over that section of the channel. For a manufacturer, this could mean more control over customer interactions, branding, sales, and service, as well as more control over the feedback received from the customers. Because marketers often go into indirect channel deals earlier on in an effort to break into a new market, that's in the indirect, when they go into that early on to break into a new market, they sometimes will fail to consider that moving away from a powerful wholesaler or distributor can be a very difficult task to accomplish, and one that can be damaging to both their brand and to their profits if that intermediary decides to fight against the switch to direct distribution. So I'm not saying don't go with a wholesaler or a distributor. It's a great idea. There's a lot of good things about it. Just remember that once you're there, you have to have a really solid exit plan to be able to move from there to a more direct distribution to your retailer. Strategic fit basically is the idea that we're going to have strategic fit between the selected channels and the company and the company and its marketing strategy. So we make sure everything fits together. And so a couple of questions here. You can consider, how channel selection affects other marketing factors such as price or promotion of the product itself. So how, what you do in your channel will somehow affect the price because of all these other players that are in there getting their little bits of profit as well. It may affect your promotion because now we have other people there in the way, and how am I going to promote if I'm also paying for these other functions to be taken care of? And even the product, there may be ways that in the channel someone says, you know what, if you change your product, we can ship it more effectively or more efficiently. And so now you go back and you change your product because you know that that's going to somehow affect, or that the channel's going to affect the product. And at the same time, those other P's can affect your channel. So you need to watch those other P's. And so, for example, too many price promotions might strip the product from the shelves because people are buying like crazy. And then it causes what appears to be a distribution problem, but that's not really a distribution problem. It's really a price promotion problem. Or maybe changes to the product packaging might be really good for the customers, and you say, wow, you know what? The customers love this new package and it's so great and it looks great on the shelf, but maybe it results in less efficient shipping options. And so now you have to pay more for shipping. So any of the things that you do are always interrelated, and we have to be really careful when we're working on channel issues, particularly that might affect other parts of our marketing mix. And finally, let's end with channel tactics, where our goal is to implement channel tactics that are agile and responsive to market fluctuations. Now, the great thing about distribution channels is the opportunity to work with many other people and organizations in an effort to find the right balance between effectiveness and efficiency. But this means that the channels are run by people, and they're regularly in a state of flux with individual organizations or people changing their systems and policies and efficiencies. And as a result, it's your job as a marketer to see short-term issues, to find out these short-term issues, and to respond to them with tactical changes that resolve the issues in a way that stays on brand as well as on distribution, if you will, meaning that the channel as a whole will be minimally affected by your changes. So you can make changes, but you don't want to mess up that channel you've worked so hard to build. Now, sometimes this can require hiring of additional third-party vendors, or changes in manufacturing, or changes in communications. And the keys are to stay aware of potential changes, monitor your channels, and have contingency plans in place so that when an issue arises, you're prepared to act quickly. Now, overall, Distribution channels are the underlying structure to all marketing efforts. Without distribution, even the best product will not be sold or delivered. So as you move through your work and participate in your personal commerce, be sure to spend time contemplating the distribution channels that allow you to make purchases, acquire goods and services, and enjoy a multitude of hopefully effective and efficient exchanges.